Sometimes I find that our faith, living our faith, can be a little busy sometimes. Do you ever find that sometimes? Maybe you have no idea what I'm talking about. Maybe you're new to the faith. You're like, what? It gets busy? I think some of us are with us. Sometimes just when we are following along with Jesus, it's good, but sometimes can be a lot of things that Jesus is inviting us to do. Sometimes it can feel like, just like as with the announcements in church life, there's a lot going on. And I don't know if you're with me, but sometimes it's nice to just take a little rest. And I think Jesus gives permission for us to take a little rest. Have you ever rested? Let's see if this works here. Oh. I don't know if I'm doing this right. There we go. Have you ever rested with God? Perhaps you have. Perhaps you're like, rest with God? Say more. We're going to try a little experiment right now. This is going to be really awkward for some people, and that's okay. Just like own it. We're going to be just silent with God right now for just like 60 seconds. It's okay. It's just going to be 60 seconds. Silent with God. The only instruction here is to just notice God's presence. Don't say any words. Don't feel like you need to hear anything back. Maybe you will. Maybe God will communicate something to you. That's okay, but there's no necessity. Just want you to sit silently, notice God's presence, try to enjoy God's presence, and we're just going to rest for 60 seconds with God. All right, starting now. You may come out of silence. How was that? Great. Some people are like, oh my gosh, it was agonizing. I'm glad it's done. Different experiences, right? It's okay. Some are like, that was only 60 seconds. I could have gone so much longer. Some are like, oh my gosh, it felt like 5 hours. We're going to have a lot of different experiences. But one of the experiences that I trust that many of us may have shared, and I don't want to name your experience. If this was just an enjoyable, peaceful experience for you with God, that is a wonderful thing. I also want to acknowledge that for many people, maybe almost immediately, there became what we might consider some barriers, some blockages into the enjoyment or the connection with God in that experience. All sorts of things that sort of almost seem to creep in. And I have heard this from so many people. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in my own pastoral experience. A lot of times, pastors, churches, we give lots of people good things to do with their faith. Pray, read the Bible, come to Bible chats on Sunday morning. And yet, one thing I hear from a lot of people is this idea that even while we're doing these things, there's this kind of barrier, this break in the lines of communication. Sometimes people say it's almost like when I pray sometimes, it feels like I'm praying to an empty room, or when I just find it really difficult to do the things that I feel like I should be doing for my faith. And I find when it's quiet and when we're resting, that's when it really creeps in. It's almost as if sometimes we almost have to feel like we have to busy ourselves with these activities, because if we were to slow down for a moment, all of a sudden, it's like we get this distracted, and we get sort of bombarded by these barriers, these chains, these things that are reminding us about how in some way or another we're not as close to God as we'd like to think we are. And these barriers number in the many, and this is an ever-growing list of them. I have collected a bunch of them. These are from things that I've experienced myself and things people have said to me. Reminders of things you should be doing for God, but feel like you are not doing enough, or not feeling like you're doing it the way that you should be doing it. And so the companion of that is that you feel trapped in guilt. Guilt for not being enough as a Christian, or doing this practice enough. I'm not reading my Bible enough. I'm not praying enough. I hear this a lot, and that guilt kind of creeps in. It often creeps in even more strongly when we're silent, because we have nothing to distract us. Sometimes faith indeed feels less like a joyous journey, but it sometimes feels like a chore. Sometimes we might even admit that we're bored with spiritual practices. I would much rather do other things. I know I probably should pray, I should read the Bible, but I get bored. And people almost aren't careful to admit that because they wonder what that might mean for them, for their faith. Clouded prayer, as I mentioned before, that feeling of like when I pray, I just feel like it's almost as if I wonder if anyone's even there. And again, people feel guilty and even shameful for admitting that because they feel like as a Christian, I must be the only one. And the more I talk to people to realize, I realize you're not the only one. A lot of people in this room probably feel the same thing, maybe not every time, but maybe a lot of the time. When we're silent, we often are reminded about our sin, the things that we know we definitely should not be doing because God has commanded us to not, and sometimes we get terribly convicted about those habitual sins, those things that keep on coming over and over again that we've brought to God so many times, and it just doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't seem to be getting any better, and we just feel even more distant from God. Doubt and big questions, the kinds of big questions that make me even wonder if this is even real. I know you've heard me admit many times, these are some of the barriers that I find in myself as well. You're not alone. Anger at God. This is one thing that lots of people feel very careful to admit, almost as if we're not even allowed to admit that I could even be angry at him for something. Distractions are many. It might have been what you experienced in this very practice of silence, where you just felt just distracted. Oh my gosh, what do I got to get at the store? Do we have enough milk? What are the kids doing tomorrow kind of thing? All the distractions that come in. Busyness, not even having just enough time. Your schedule's so tight-packed that I don't feel like I have any time to actually sit and connect with God. Sometimes it's just selfishness. We realize, and I'm almost ashamed of the fact that I just kind of I need to tend to me right now. I don't want to give to others or serve God or anything like that. So often we're reminded about external factors, things that are outside of our control, that are plaguing our spirit. The broken relationships that we have in our life, those can be terrible barriers to our faith because it makes us feel all rotten inside, and we've probably given it to God 10,000 times, but sometimes there's still that animosity that might be in your workplace, that might even be in your family. And it tears you up and it makes you feel distant from God. Your health, mental and physical health, and of course, as a sort of a general category, spiritual opposition. Many report that it's almost that kind of, you don't even know if it's specifically any of these one things, but whenever I try to connect with God, maybe you already felt it in the silence practice, I just felt bombarded, like as if there was some opposing force working against me. You are not alone. So many folks feel these things, and it is a barrier to our faith. It is so common that I've actually given these things a name, a phrase. I call them spiritual toxins. I kind of like this phrase because I think it kind of synchronizes with something we're familiar with in our culture. People are often talking about toxic things, toxic chemicals, toxic things in our sunscreen, in our food, and you're often wanting to detox, go to the spa and have a little detox kind of thing. Toxins are a language we're a little bit familiar with in our culture, which is why I've kind of adopted that to talk about spiritual toxins, things in our soul that, especially when we're quiet, when we're resting with God, creep in and reveal themselves as barriers to our faith, barriers to our connection with God. And as I kind of hinted at before, sometimes the very practices that we are told to do or invited to do from the church, from pastors, are a source of their own toxin. We're told that there are things that we should be doing for God. I hear this all the time. I should be reading my Bible more. I should be praying more. And we've even been repeating this. It's not a bad thing to say that we as Christians are invited, perhaps even should in some sense, be gathering together. It's a good thing to gather, to follow Jesus. It's a good thing to learn from him, to read his Bible. It's there as a blessing. Jesus tells us, commands us to pray. He commands us as followers of him to serve, to love one another, to encourage, and to give. And yet, one of the things that I often notice in myself, but I notice from other people, is that even though we know we perhaps should be doing these things, we still don't. And I think when I talk to people, I hear these other toxins coming along with it, that they feel trapped in guilt because of it. And you might say, well, then just get to it. And they say, okay, but I don't know if you've ever been in this situation that sometimes just saying, well, just read your Bible more, just pray more, so often that just saying that I should doesn't actually change what I actually do, and I just feel more trapped in guilt because of all these companion things. It feels like a chore. I'm bored with them, and even when I do them, I feel like I'm clouded in my connection to God. I have struggled with this a lot in my faith, even as someone in a pastoral position. And this may not include you yourself as you're sitting here, but I do know after talking with lots of people that a version of this is very commonly shared. And I think this is something that in our faith is really primary for us to start with as we start growing in our faith. Because again, we've talked a lot about how we want to gather, learn, pray, serve, love, encourage, and give. But I know that for some people, that's just going to be lopped on like an extra added burden, and people struggle knowing how to actually get going on these things. So in thinking about this and reflecting about this a lot, I ended up turning many years ago to this thought that I'm going to share with you because I was sort of sitting with my wife, Diana. She's wonderful. You'll like her more than me. And I thought, in one sense, I should talk to my wife. In one sense, I should spend time with my wife, learn about my wife, encourage her, serve her. But that's not the reason why I do it. I don't do it just because I should, somebody told me to. I want to. I want to talk to her. And I'm not just doing this to score brownie points later. We didn't have a fight this morning or anything like that. That's not the reason why. That does happen, though, sometimes. The morning of fights? Oh. I want to love her. I want to be with her, learn about her, pray with her. I generally want to do this. Yes, sometimes it's good when you're not doing it, when you're type of trouble, it's good to follow the shoulds. But ultimately, if she just detected that I was doing it because I should, well, I guess I should talk to you now. All right, this is the time to talk to Diana time. Oh, great, that was done. Let's go. I don't treat Diana like that, but I often treat God like that. This is my time for God. I'm doing my time for God. Okay, good. Glad that's done with over. Why do I want to spend time with Diana? But sometimes I don't want to spend time with God. I know many of us share in this feeling. And what do we do about this? What's the fix? What's the answer? So there's many things to be said And in fact, these kinds of things is going to be the subject of our entire series. The first thing is there is no quick fix. For me, it was an exploration of many, many years of sort of starting with my desire for God. Like I start with my desire for Diana. And for you, you can start with their desire for, not everyone is married. It could be that person that you enjoy spending time with. Hopefully there's someone. Your friend, your mom, your dad, whoever that person is in your life. Who do you want to spend time with? And why is that different than maybe a relationship with God? And for some of you, again, it's like, it is no different. I love spending time with God. You are an encouragement to all of us. So please don't feel like you're like out of the picture here. We want to hear from you. We want to learn from you and gain your spirit. But for the rest of us who are kind of coming along with the journey, I was brought to a number of passages. I was brought to this very passage that Carolyn read for us. The story of Bartimaeus. And it's a short passage. I want to kind of highlight some of the portions here. Jesus was walking along the path to Jericho. Again, we're in Mark chapter 10. And here is this man who was blind. And as we all know, in that time of the era of our history, if you were blind, like you were kind of outcast in society. We didn't have all the social services we had. This is a person who was poor, who was desperate, was at the end of his rope. And so he sees Jesus coming. Verse 47, when he heard that Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." No one told him he should. No one told him he had to. He must. This is the program we're all doing as our church. We're all sitting on the side of the road saying, no. From the depths of his desire, he shouted out, probably embarrassingly, I don't even care what anyone else is going to think. I'm going to cry out because I'm at the end of my rope. Son of David, have mercy on me. And it even says, verse 48, many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, shush. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Just to pause there for a second. And I want us to be brought back to perhaps a moment in our life, perhaps a moment right now. That is ultimately the cry of our heart. We're beyond the shoulds, beyond the activities, behind the programs, church service, and all that. The cry of your heart is, Lord, Son of God, have mercy on me. And for this series, this is a great feeling to latch onto, because right in there is our desire for God, for our desire for his mercy, our desire for his presence. So often, wherever we go in our faith, we're felt like we have to go and do something that we should, but it's outside of our desire. But wherever we continue on from this, I want us to lock on to that desire for God's mercy, for God's goodness, for God's wholeness. So Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up, on your feet. He is calling you. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped up to his feet and came to Jesus. And Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? What does it mean for you, for me, that in the depth of your cry for mercy from Jesus, for his presence, amidst all the feelings of guilt and being trapped in that cloudedness, that Jesus, in the same way with Bartimaeus, is in the spiritual sense walking up right to you right now, saying, what do you want me to do for you? He cares. He is there. He is not distant. He is not behind the cloud, like our feelings would perhaps convince us that he is, but he is there. He is asking, what do you want me to do for you? The answer is going to be different for all of us. For Bartimaeus, it was, Rabbi, I want to see. And so Jesus said, go, and your faith has healed you. Immediately Bartimaeus received sight. And then what did he do? Did he say, all right, great, that's my time with Jesus, close the book and move on to other things? No, because he found such salvation, mercy, goodness, restoration in Jesus, he followed Jesus along the road. And so I want to invite us through this series, through our journey as a church, through our journey through small groups, because I've said before that our small groups are also going to be joining in this journey as well. And so come be part of a small group to invest in this a little bit more and dig into this, because I know this is a feeling that's shared by us. How can we start from our desire for Jesus? And then rather than feel like all the things, the gathers, the learns, the pray, that these are just chores to be done, how can we find ways to feel like this is something that I'm doing out of my desire? I don't need to gather. I get to gather. I don't need to learn, but I get to learn. And sometimes, in my view, what we need to do is sort of address those spiritual toxins, because sometimes it's less about just getting more on the program and addressing all those many things that are in our souls. So I am sort of suggesting that as we begin our journey together, that was the prompt for the passage we were doing before. I skipped the slides a few there, probably making Ivan nervous. I invite us to heed what Jesus invited for all of us. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Whatever Bartimaeus found on that road, I trust he found that it was an easy journey. And yes, there are crunch times. There were 5,000 to feed at one point, of course, and involved some activity. But ultimately, we have rest for our souls. So I invite us into the remedy, if you will, of starting with rest, calming our spirit enough to notice what sort of toxins are within us. When we quiet our soul, when we notice God, when we do this together as a discipling community, what we're calling our small groups, when we give ourselves permission as a group with someone guiding me along the way, what do I notice in my soul when I am quiet, when I am still, when I am resting, so that I can be restored by him rather than just simply driving myself into more activities in order to cloud over the guilt trap, or the chores that I feel like this faith is. And so, much like I suggested at the beginning of the sermon, if these are spiritual toxins, why not let's have a spiritual detox, spiritual spa day. Yay! We're going to scrub, we're going to get a little spiritual sauna time, we're going to have all the essential oils and aromatherapy. No. Metaphorically speaking, of course. We are going to attempt to, not through all these are good things to do just kind of on your own to enjoy, but we're going to go through a spiritual detox as a church. That's what this whole series is about. And we're going to be learning about it in the sermons. We're going to be practicing it in our discipling communities, in our small groups. If you're not part of one, we are still working on having the full list published, but they're not closed. They're not secret. Please, we did an effort to kind of bring everyone in one. If you're not currently in one, because we might have missed you, sorry, no offense, talk to me. Call the office. We'll get you part of one, because we want people to be part of this with us. This is the journey that we're on. We're going on a spiritual detox, and we're going to attempt, that's the slide from before, now with the new white motif. We're going to attempt to be detoxing, if you will, or addressing those spiritual toxins that are in our souls. The things that we should be doing for God. Again, trapped for guilt. Faith feels like a chore. Boredom with spiritual practices. Clouded prayer. Sin, doubt and big questions. Anger at God. Distractions. Busyness. Selfishness. Broken relationships. Health and spiritual opposition. And not to say that we're going to be fixing them in one sort of you take this pill and call me in the morning kind of thing. We all know that sometimes it's a process. Sometimes we begin on this process, and yet we can go on this process expectantly, because we serve a God who is powerful. And yet I think many of us, one of the main reasons why we've struggled with this is because we are often convinced that we have to do this alone. We have to suffer in silence, or that we're the only one that struggle through this. So hopefully you already feel that invitation to say, you know what? I do want to have rest with God. I do want to notice how I can deal with these toxins that's bringing me out of the joy of gathering, learning, praying, serving, encouraging, loving, and giving. So join with us. We're going to be, again, teaching about it on Sundays, and we're going to be then practicing it in our discipling communities. As announced before, of course, our discipling community this week is not in our discipling communities in our small groups, but it's our whole church potluck. So if anything, that's a reason. There's not going to be like bath salts and like a sauna, although wouldn't that be great, at the potluck. But there will be a community in which you can be known, which you can be loved, which you can have connection with, so that your community can help you find the path back to Jesus. Come join us on that journey as we find rest in God and go on the journey with the disciples, with Bartimaeus, and with everyone else. Amen.